it's great listening to all the stories and insight. We came up with the concept of the business of you, which for me is about making sure it's the same as, you're calling it an individual development plan, but running in parallel almost. This is my professional sporting business, but also this is my personal development business, and I've got a plan for both. And I believe, Andre talked about what happens when you get injured, but all you should be able to do is say, when I'm fit and healthy, I can play and I can focus 100% on delivering on a weekend. But then as soon as I'm injured or as soon as I've got any downtime, I should be just as committed to my personal development plan, and knowing that this is just as important. And I wish, Steve, are there any stats that actually prove that by having commitment, and yours is mandatory, I think, into the academy, but having a commitment in that personal development plan for life after sport actually improves the performance level on a Saturday? Because that, for me, would fundamentally change the motivation of the director of rugby or the funding behind the player. But for me, I was that player's rep. I did most of you don't really know me, but I did an anthropology, sort of psychology degrees at university. I went to work at ICI, and before it was a professional game, and I was using the Myers-Briggs and the 360-degree feedback. So when I came into the game, I was making my mates sit down and listen to a financial advisor. But as the time moved on, the appetite of the player to bother, I just got labelled as boring. Like you said, Sam. I think you're talking about live slow and die old. It was so difficult to get the players. There's always some early adapters. There's always some conscientious guys. I think like the people on this call. But then there's many people that just want to buy trainers, and they're not interested. They just want to go and sell Viagra if it's Leeds, or drink coffee. And you know who we're talking about. But for me, it's how do we reach out to the player? In my motivation, in my job now, I do the same as Bernard. Really, I'm using my network, and I'm a mentor, and I'm coaching in business, and I love it. But how do we get through to the player? And to motivate someone, you've got to find out what they need. And unfortunately, those 19, 20-year-old kids don't really know what they need. And so for me, it comes back to the education. Or if I come back to you, Steve, is it mandatory over in Australia? Do you make all those players sit down? And then is the education complete enough? Do they really believe it's in their own best interest?
Look, I'd like to say yes, across the 5 provinces, but I'd have to say it's an indifferent take-up. And one of the areas I'm working on right now with Rugby Australia is to put the leadership program across every province in a generic modelling. And everything you've mentioned there, Tim, there are actually, I'll send you some studies on. It's social psychology, but there's some correlation between, the conversion from pro sport into the skill sets from pro sport into the workplace. There are documents out there and journals, but certainly it's a critical area. I mean, Dylan will testify too as one of my staff. It's incredibly challenging right now, and for the life of me, I don't see the why they don't understand in the provinces the detail we need to go to. So I've been very individualistic with my work, even as a coach. There's nothing that we're talking about now that hasn't sort of hit a button with me. But I mean, even in a team environment, we're made up of many different characters. So you mentioned things like motivation. Incredibly important. We have to find out what motivates the individual, and it's not money. It's not. You can't just categorize and label. There are so many different things that turn a player on. They should all testify to.
Especially in
So look, there's some great questions in there, Tim, around leadership. Particularly around the motivation side of it. but I just, we're having a real challenge right now in Australian rugby to actually get this embedded inside our delivery inside an academy. So it's a big piece. It's a really big piece.
Well, this is the opportunity, hopefully, to work together, and I think people will listen to different sorts of evidence based on their personality, won't they? And having the evidence that says you'll make a more successful transition. We talk about the cliff at the end of your playing career. We want to try and build stability and on a mental level, on a financial level, on a even on a physical level. You want to make sure that you're ready for that transition. And Sam's done a brilliant job of preparing.
Sorry, Tim, just one final point on that I will add, and you just triggered something. I just want to get it out. I don't distinguish between the playing component and work. So I talk, a journey, and part of it is, and I mentioned it before around the skill sets and the tools, and I mentioned the word transition because it's the topic. But we need to get these players to understand that the bumps and the hurdles are incredibly important in terms of real life. The bumps meaning, we mentioned, I think Andre mentioned it, the preparation for a 20-year-old who has a really bad career-ending injury. How are we looking after that particular individual? Well, if we make them aware that this is just part of, it's going to be very, very hard for him to accept it, or she to accept that this is the end. But I think when they come into the program, they need to be, education's the wrong word. They need to just understand that this is part of your journey in life. It's not the piece, and then you move on to another piece. It's just, there's detours, but that's life. That's life. So longitudinal, rather than compartmentalizing how we speak with our young players, is incredibly important. Full stop. Don't start.
Steve, that's really insightful and really interesting, because I know you try to avoid the word education, but to be fair, we are educating ourselves day in, day out. And by talking to people and saying, like you said, your life journey is this. The fact that you're going through a sporting career, then maybe a business career like Bernard's gone through, or coaching careers, is you're still educating, you're still learning all the time. But I take exactly what you're saying. I think it's a really, really valid point to say that, sport is just a part of life, not a compartment of life.
Yes. I mean, I don't downplay it, but certainly it's inclusive of. So when they come into an academy or a pathway program, it's incredibly important to highlight and not prioritise that this is the be-all to end-all. And how we actually do that, there's a whole host of different methods we use. But look, we call it learning and education as part of our rugby program, and Dylan heads up that part. So I get frustrated sometimes with the fact that, and I understand what you're saying around the education and the mentoring. We're all doing that. We're all part of. But to me, it should be just a part of the journey. It's just one stop of many, as we all know, as we get older, that it's just one stop. And as I said, the 18 to 20-year-old in your pro academies, they don't want to hear that. They're just thinking about now. But eventually the information you provide, the experiences you provide, whether it's internal or external, and we do a lot of external as well, but they have to understand it. All you're doing there is providing a broader scope, and they're not going to understand it completely now. And as a facilitator or a teacher, that's quite difficult to manage because, and Dylan will testify to this too, because you want to see results. Well, I'm a coach, so I want results. But so it's been quite difficult for me to manage that component of it, that you're not going to get a result or a complete sell between you and the player or you and the athlete straight away. So the light bulb moment I spoke about before, invariably that comes a decade plus